been approved. We didn't want to wait, however, for the development to happen. The artists here in the community have had a long history of art making, and we needed to create space for artists to come and connect and make their work. The Djabugay community have a very rich and diverse collective of artists, and they live here, they live in Cairns, they live in Brisbane, they live throughout the state in different areas. And I think since we have begun these small developments here, there's been a lot of interest from community living in those other areas. They're excited about the idea that this is happening, and they want to know more about how they can connect and how they can develop a stronger relationship with us. So really we can't work fast enough at this stage to make things work and happen, but we're taking our time to do it right, and we want to get it right.
It's amazing how when you actually create a centre, people's identity becomes very strongly connected to that. And I imagine that for this happening, people go, I want to come home, or I want to do whatever I can to contribute to build it, because they absolutely know the meaning of it. I love that example you drew earlier for us, where you highlighted that the Ranger program has a very strong connection to the Arts Centre in terms of those materials that are brought for the artists to be able to work with. I mean, it raises a whole lot of things like the authenticity of the work that will ultimately be engaged with, sold, seen, and also collaborated on. How does that work so far in terms of the Ranger program being here in the corporation?
We recognise that our artists have a wealth of information, cultural knowledge, and a bigger part of what we do, what the artists do weekly is foraging and collecting on country. We want to ensure that that's done ethically and sourced on country. And so we've got a unique opportunity to create a really strong and a really good model here to work very closely with Boomba Rangers and have that exchange between our artists and our rangers. So we want to be able to partner with them on a number of projects to ensure that the way that artists are engaging and the work that they're producing is culture-led, and speaks to country and tells those stories, those important stories, historical stories, and promotes the amazing, rich culture that is Djabugay.
Who are some of the artists we should be looking out for over the upcoming years?
Taya Hunter is a very promising young contemporary artist, and has had an arts practice for some time now. The community and the broader industry will be very familiar with Auntie Rhonda Brim and the Weavers group that have had a strong connection here in country and have provided an amazing nurturing environment for artists who don't recognise themselves as artists to come into a space and experiment and explore with art making and sharing culture and share story. And they produce incredibly beautiful, fine, arts and crafts. And their weaving styles known to industry. And we just really want to create create some leverage there to create more pathways, more opportunities for them to connect with that national sector and across Australia.
It's an extraordinary vision, and it's got a very strong sense of purpose and very strong drive. How important, and this is for three of you, how important do you think First Nations people making decisions about their directions and how culture will be managed is
for me to answer that question, you just have to look at, and even not so recent past, that the expectations from industry really, and I talk about industry and government, really drives what we produce and how we produce culture and how culture is represented. But if we took a step back and talked about what our identity and how we want that presented and think about that, then we can drive how our culture is presented and how that should happen. And what I think the best example of that is how language is taught in the schools and elsewhere should not be determined by education department, but should be determined by us. And if we're in a position then to drive that and develop and build our own products, and then we'll have, and we do have now, like schools and other interested people and interested in culture, like coming to us and wanting to learn about, the bayou making, the weaving, the understanding how cultural practice on a day-to-day basis was undertaken. So being able to develop those products ourselves, I think, is important. But that basis I come back to again is being able to have that plan on how you want that presented. And the motivation for what you're doing is also important because that really drives your plan. I think that's the key point. And, like I often think when we look at that space, we can use all the excuses in the world around why our culture is not being presented the way we want it to. But it's there for us to take it. It's there for us to say, no, this is the way it happens and this is how it should be presented, rather than have it dictated to us.
And how far does that go? Because I know the plan has such a number of areas. Do you just want to give us some highlights of what those areas are and why they're important?
I guess when you look at those cornerstones that I spoke before, land and native title, and then language and culture that lead into economic development, that triangle has a big base, and that base is, being able to get community input into that, being able to have all of those, as you said, that representation of culture for it to be authentic and real to what people are saying, rather than, like say the good example was how the product as Djabugay was defined for the tourism industry. But how can you then present something that's culture, that's presented and it's authentic, that's come from that basis of culture and then accepted by not just tourism but broader society? I think that's the basis of what we're talking about, and being able to build those foundations is important.
I noticed that one of those is, the food is there and the art and culture is there and the Rangers program in terms of caring for country. One of the things I found fascinating was about the technology and innovation, which suggests it's an invitation to the next generation because that's truly the world they'll be inhabiting and I guess the opportunity for them to also take control and self-determine that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that we're finding now is that, like the concept that Bree spoke of in regards to land management feeding into arts, what I'm finding is that it's working back the other way as well, because just yesterday we were out with an elder and she identified in a country some plants that should be there in greater numbers and they weren't there in the numbers that we'd expect for that country. So then that talks about the land management practices. So how do we approach fire for that country? How do we then get rid of species that may be invasive to those areas? So culture pushes back the other ways, or arts pushes back on land management just as much as land management influences arts and culture.
Because culture is important, obviously it's a cornerstone, it's a huge asset. I'm going to ask you, what do you imagine in 20 years' time that a young child born today will inherit and understand that that's their birthright at the age of 20? What is that world that you want them to inhabit?
Dennis answered that, I think, what he was talking about before around language, and that is the key to it.
Yeah. Trying to turn that around, a young child that's learning the Djabugay language at a young age, speaking that fluently, say English would be the second language. So that's where I see that sort of structure, just for more we speak it to our young kids, the more they hear the sound. Because that's how we verbally spoke, just by hearing. So more conversation around the table, 1 out of 10 will learn quicker than the 9. but just amongst themselves, starting that conversation, and that's what I'm passionate about. Looking at 20 years' time, is seeing someone that can speak their language fluently. So walking in the main street, hey, what are you talking? You're not speaking English. You're speaking Djabugay, So that's my aspirations, what I want to do, just to stick in there to change that view for our young ones to understand the language. It's very important, Speaking the language, as I spoke before, it's releasing itself. Like I can't see it in the next 5 years. The more kids we can influence to speak the language, that's what I see in 20 years' time.
That's so strong. They say that the language you speak is a world that you see. And if in 20 years' time you speak Djabugay as your first language, then your world is Djabugay. And your identity is Djabugay. In closing, what would you like to leave us with in terms of this going to many people?
If you believe in something, don't let it go. Just keep climbing that ladder. The ladder doesn't stop there. It keeps going. Because the next one after that will climb the ladder. So, it gets higher and higher. The more it gets higher and higher, the population, the number will follow. And that's where I find it very important. Like as I mentioned a little bit of my history, that's where I keep thriving through where I want to go. Yeah, it is important.
Great, thanks. Great.
I would love to see a continued cultural exchange across this country, across Australia, between First Nations people, to be able to come and participate in our events and our conferences and our exhibitions, and see our artists across these lands thrive, travel over international waters and come back because they want to share what they've learnt and inspire the next generation of amazing creatives, and learn how to look after our country and promote the amazing parts of our country. And I would love for people to come back and see the rainforest in this area in the way that their ancestors have seen it.
Great, thank you. And last word with you, Barry.
I guess to answer that question, I'll use the same wording in that, saying that to be able to look at how culture has been enriched because of the wealth we've created, and being able to push those opportunities that are there back in. But like what Dennis was saying, that it is a never-ending ladder, and we still have to keep climbing, but we have to be able to take our mob with us on that ladder. So that's the important thing.
Thank you, all three of you. I think in terms of what people are going to experience just by this presence of Djabugay Corporation and everything that you're going to realise, that is an extraordinary invitation to the 21st century, and really it's all like, come and join you. And I think we all will.
We need help. We need hands, as many people as possible, and we need people to be, come and be, with their honest, true selves, and work with us to make those dreams and those aspirations happen.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I hope people hear that and you get lots of phone calls and you get what you want. Yeah. Thank you. Lovely.